We are now 5 weeks into the conflict with Iran, and the economic shockwaves are hitting, well, pretty much everywhere. Today, we're going to trace that fallout, all the way from the oil rigs to the stock market floor.
So let's just start with this number, because it's the one grabbing all the headlines. $115. That is the price for a single barrel of Brent crude oil this morning. And, this isn't just some number on a screen. It's really a barometer for this whole conflict, and it's sending a serious chill through the global economy.
And if you want to understand the tension that's driving all this, you really don't have to look much further than this quote right here from the U.S. president. It just lays bare the massive economic stakes that are on the table and explains why the markets are so incredibly nervous right now.
All right, so let's start at the epicenter of this whole economic earthquake, the oil market itself. The price surge we're seeing, it's truly one for the history books.
Okay, so here's the heart of the issue. We're 5 weeks in, and the Strait of Hormuz, which is basically a superhighway for global energy, is pretty much blocked off. When you choke off a fifth of the entire world's oil supply like that, you better believe prices are going to go through the roof. It's almost inevitable.
And to put this into perspective, we're not just talking about a little price spike. This is on track to be the biggest single monthly gain for Brent crude ever. We're talking about a bigger jump than what we saw after Iraq's invasion of Kuwait back in the 90s. The significance of that, yeah, it's huge.
Now, let's look at the first major ripple effect and see how this oil shock is starting to hammer global financial markets.
You can see it right here. No market is safe, that's for sure. But the Asian stock markets, like the Nikkei and the Kospi, are getting hit way harder than their counterparts in the US and Europe. So, what's going on there? Why the big difference?
Well, it really boils down to this kind of triple thread. First, these are economies that are massive importers of energy, so they feel the pain at the pump immediately. That then fuels these fears of slowing growth, which in turn raises the scary prospect that their central banks might have to hike interest rates to fight off all the inflation from these crazy energy costs.
Okay, so beyond the financial markets, there's an even bigger problem brewing for the actual physical movement of goods across the planet.
Like we said, it all kicked off with the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. That put an immediate chokehold on a key oil route.
But just as the world was trying to wrap its head around that disruption, a second, and maybe even more dangerous choke point has come under fire.
Meet the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. It's another crucial path for something like 6 million barrels of oil a day. But it's also a digital superhighway. It's home to these vital undersea fiber optic cables that literally connect Europe and Asia to the internet. With Houthi rebels now targeting this area, the risk is doubled. You've got physical energy and digital information, both in the crosshairs.
And the consequences of this are pretty simple, but they're incredibly costly. With these straits threatened, ships have no choice but to take the long way around Africa. That can add weeks to a journey. It burns a ton more fuel, and it sends insurance and shipping premiums sky high. And guess who those costs eventually get passed on to? Us, the consumers.
So this brings us to the really high-stakes game of chess being played by world powers and the tough choices they're all staring down.
If you look at the United States, for example, you're getting two totally different messages. On one side, you've got the hawks, making threats to seize oil hubs like Clark Island and even talking about ground troops. But then, on the other side, you've got the doves, who are still deep in diplomatic talks and hinting a deal is possible. For the markets, this just creates what one analyst called grave uncertainty.
And all that uncertainty forces governments around the world to ask themselves a really tough question. With energy prices absolutely crushing their citizens, what do? Is stepping in a good idea, or is it a really costly mistake?
Take something like a fuel tax cut, which Australia has done. The short-term benefit is obvious, right? It gives people some relief, and it calms down a lot of popular anger. But the long-term problems are serious. Economists argue that high prices are actually necessary to get people to use less. And maybe more importantly, most governments just don't have the cash for this kind of relief right now.
And this is the absolute key. As Berenberg's chief economist Holger Schmieding points out here, unlike in past crises, government debt levels are already sky high. They can't just spend their way out of this one. Their hands are kind of tied.
So what's the alternative then? Well, instead of these broad, really expensive policies like cutting fuel taxes for everybody, most economists are suggesting temporary and very targeted measures that are aimed only at the low-income households who are getting hit the worst. It's like using a surgical scalpel instead of a giant, expensive hammer.
So where does all of this leave us? The truth is, the path forward is incredibly cloudy, and the economic damage is, unfortunately, still spreading. And it's so important to remember this isn't just about oil anymore. We're now seeing strikes hitting major aluminum producers in the Middle East, which just caused aluminum prices to jump almost 5%. This is another one of those tremors, and it shows how this disruption is now hitting other vital industrial supply chains.
You know, when you just look at the timeline, the speed of this escalation is pretty alarming. In just 5 weeks, we've gone from the start of the conflict to a major shipping route being shut down to missile strikes from new players and now to the real possibility of ground troops being sent in. That question mark for the future is just looming larger and larger.
And that really brings us to the mood in the markets right now. The smart money is definitely not betting on a quick and easy resolution. The general feeling is that, for the near future at least, this crisis is much more likely to get worse before it gets any better.
Which leaves us with this final massive question. You've got governments that are strapped for cash and military tensions that are rising every single day. The global economy is basically walking a tightrope. How do you navigate a crisis when the line between a diplomatic deal and a much wider war is thinner than there's ever been?